All right. So, good morning. I'm happy to be here at the second and last session as we talk about now the liturgy of Yom Kippur. The first time, last time when we did this, I tried to be quite comprehensive in terms of the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah. That left me with really not enough time at the end, and I think it was just too fast. Now, this week we may run the opposite problem. I don't know, we might wind up ending earlier. But what I chose to do is to simply focus on the highlights of the service. Um, and so I want to start in terms of talking about Yom Kippur um, with actually what the Torah tells us to do. And it's part of the actually the fifth Aliyah. I'm going to read it to you that we read on Yom Kippur. And this day shall be to you a law for all times. In the seventh month, on the 10th of the month, you shall, it says, practice self-denial. The Hebrew word is ta'anu et nafshotehem. You should afflict your nefesh. Now, in rabbinic Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, the nefesh is the soul. But in biblical Hebrew, it isn't the soul at all, it's the body, right? Right. And so ruach might be somewhat like soul in biblical Hebrew, ruach chaim, but here it's clearly a reference to the body. And anitem et nafshotehem is you should afflict your bodies. And why it goes on. And you should do no manner of work, neither the citizen nor the alien who resides among you, for on this day atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins. You shall be cleansed before Adonai. Right? And I'm sure you know this verse. It's repeated a lot. Ki bayom hahu yechaper alechem l'tacher etchem mikol chatotehem lifnei Adonai titaru. Right? And so, two things. It's a day when we seek to have all of our sins cleansed. And part of that is afflicting our souls. So, what does it mean in terms of afflicting our souls? The Torah itself doesn't say, but rabbinic tradition develops it into a series of prohibitions, things that we deny our bodies. And the most obvious and best known is eating and drinking. Right? It's a 25-hour fast. Remember that in Judaism, we're always not sure when the day begins or ends. So we start with sundown and we end when the stars come out. Total of about 25 hours, especially you start a little before sundown because we don't want to go too close because, we might miss it. So 25-hour fast. I was at the gym yesterday talking to my trainer, who is a religious Christian and quite knowledgeable, both in the Bible and other things, and takes his religion extremely seriously. He said, I know you have this big holiday. What do you actually do? Do you have special meals? I said, no, our special meal is we eat nothing. We eat nothing for 25 hours.
Wonderful.
And he said, whoa, 25 hours. I don't know if I could do that. So,
We make up for it before and after.
yeah, that is true, Barry. We do make up for it before and after. I want to think about in a minute. First of all, I want to mention the other things that are involved in this idea of afflicting our bodies. So one is not eating and drinking. One is not anointing with oil, which was in antiquity a sign of pleasure. The modern equivalent is don't put on makeup. It's sort of, it is, and obviously we don't get our hair cut and things like that. There is a prohibition against wearing leather shoes. Um, and you may notice people in synagogue, or perhaps you yourself, wear sneakers or something else. These days, it's easy enough to get non-leather shoes that look like leather shoes, but leather was a symbol of luxury, comfort, um, and perhaps there's even something about not benefiting from animals, skin of an animal. At any rate, so that's another thing. Marital relations, right? Certainly great pleasure, and not on Yom Kippur. I'm trying to think if I've covered them all. Yes. Okay. So this idea of self-denial is part of it. Why? Like I mean, so the Torah tells us to do it, so we should do it. But there is something often called ta'amei hamitzvot, literally the taste of the commandments. But what it really means is the reasons for the commandments. Why does God ask us to afflict our bodies on this day? And lots of explanations have been given. Uh, First is self-denial and de-emphasis. Well, self-denial is showing that we're serious. We're willing to give this up to show how contrite we are. But it's also a sense that we forget how dependent we are on God. We forget that we are just creatures and that going for a day without food actually is painful. You get hungry, right? We rely on God to see to it that we are, after all, frail beings, physical beings. Um, the other idea, though, is sort of the contradiction of that, and that is that we seek to be spiritual beings, right? The angels don't eat or drink, and we do have references to these angels throughout the liturgy, and we want to be like that. Although we'll see in unetaneh tokef that even they are not pure, at least according to the author of that piyut. But the idea is to ascend to a more spiritual level. I want to add one other thing just from personal experience, and that is that it makes the holiday more impactful, at least for me. I know that by the time we come to Ne'ilah, the end of the day, and I haven't been eating for a day, there's just everything is more stronger, it's more powerful, it has a resonance for me. It puts us into a different sort of psychological state, which I think is enormously powerful and brings the whole experience to light. It's also, of course, good for the appetizing industry as we all go and have bagels and whatever, or many of us do after the holiday is over. Okay, so having talked a bit about fasting, let me just see if anyone has any questions about that or thoughts about it before I go on to the liturgy itself. And not seeing any, I'm going to share my screen. Why does it say, oh, because it's not up. Okay. Well, give me a minute here. In the process of doing something with my camera, I seem to have lost it. Hold on. Okay. And I can't. Okay. Well, this is more complicated, but we will see. Here we go. Let's get rid of that. Let's do this. Actually, I don't need that. Hang in there. Good. Now let's go to that. All right. Okay, I'm now sharing my screen. I hope you can see it. I don't know why this is here. Uh, okay, so the first thing that we experience on Kol Nidre, and I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. Let me stop sharing screen for a minute. Did everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go back to screen share again. All right, so Kol Nidre. This is not a prayer. It is the first thing we do. It is a kind of legal proceeding. It's always supposed to be done before sundown, before Yom Kippur actually starts, because legal proceedings had to be done during the day. It is a prayer that, first of all, it has a history to it. No one knows where it really started. One of the perhaps best known explanations for it, which is undoubtedly not true, is that it was the Marranos, the Jews who were forced to uh, convert to Christianity in 1492 in Spain and in other places, um, who essentially had made this vow to become Christians, and they did not want it to affect them, and so they secretly nullified it. The problem is, of course, that the earliest reference we have to Kol Nidre goes back to the 8th century, well before uh, the Spanish Inquisition. And it's referred to by two Geonim, who were leaders of their own Jewish communities in those days. And one of them, who they both mention it, one of them decries it, and the other one supports it. We'll look at the text in a minute and talk about why someone might or might not want it to be. At any rate, let's look at the beginning. B'yeshiva Shomala, by authority of the heavenly court, right? The yeshiva, the heavenly yeshiva, yeshiva Shelmata, or the earthly court. In other words, the imagery here is that a court is being convened, not only here on earth, but in heaven, and this court is being convened to nullify vows. Vows are, in the Torah and in the rabbinic tradition, extremely important. If you make them, you may not break them. And in fact, if you make a vow that you cannot keep, then the tradition is that you have to go to a panel of rabbis and you have to make the case, and only they could absolve you. You can't ignore it. And so this is about that kind of procedure. And it says with the authority of the court on high and with God's al da'at hamakom. It says divine consent, but with da'at is more than that. It's kind of understanding, and then al da'at kahal, with the consent or the understanding of the congregation. And then it goes on to say, really important thing, anu matirin lehitpalel im ha'avaryanim. We allow it to be possible to pray together with those who have transgressed. Now, from the point of view of Yom Kippur, we are all sinners. That's part of why we're all there. If you hadn't sinned at all, it's an impossibility, but presumably you wouldn't need Yom Kippur. So who are these avaryanim? They're probably people who had been excommunicated from the Jewish community. There certainly was this notion of cherem, that someone who does a very serious thing can be actually separated from the community. There's stories about rabbis who were. At any rate, On Yom Kippur, everyone is allowed in. And now we're going to get to the actual text of Kol Nidre, right? You'll know it's not in Hebrew. It's in Aramaic, which was the language of rabbinic contracts and procedures. And the language is really a series of words that are somewhat synonymous: vows, oaths, promises, which we made and could not fulfill. And here we get to two different versions. The traditional version was from last Yom Kippur to this Yom Kippur, right? And this is the traditional version that we see here. There was, however, one of Rashi's grandsons, the Rashbam, reformulated it for reasons that I think will become apparent, from the past to the future. So instead of saying from last Yom Kippur to this Yom Kippur, it is from this Yom Kippur to next Yom Kippur. Rashbam was uncomfortable with the idea that you could nullify vows. What then did they mean? And so what he did was to say vows that you might make aren't really vows anyway. That he's doing away, if you will, with the idea of vowing. At any rate, whether it's from the past to the present or from the present to the future, all vows shall be annulled and have no effect. Should we be absolved from them, released from them? These vows are not vows. These oaths are not oaths. And whatever promises we have made are not promises. And so we get this very solemn procedure where we nullify vows. On the one hand, it's very liberating. Right? Part of Yom Kippur is a fresh start, that we are moving ahead from the past. We need a clean slate. We want a clean slate. We're essentially asking to be forgiven for commitments that we've made. And the text itself doesn't say before God, but certainly that's how it's come to be understood. All vows that we've made between us and God, we nullify, we ask for forgiveness. With human beings, of course, it's much dicier. There is something, and anti-Semites pounced on this, that Jews don't keep their word. Jew will promise you something, but they won't deliver it. And so that's part of the reason I think that this was controversial. It wasn't good for the Jewish community. Today, I think the most powerful thing about it is the melody. And the melody is really extraordinary and immediately evocative. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment before we go on. And questions or comments about Kol Nidre?
Oh, I do. Okay. I have to preface this with a little story. My wife and I were having a problem with our son making his bed. So we told him that, you have to make your bed when, after you get up, you can't leave it a mess. So we came to his room the next day, and he's sleeping on top of the covers. He got around it. He didn't have to make the bed. He kind of, blew us away by just sleeping on top of the covers. So, Rabbi, when I come to this part in the service, I say to myself, I haven't made any vows to God. I haven't made any vows to anyone except my wife, obviously. But I mean, it's like I begin the holiday doubting, whether this has any applicability to me as a modern day Jew. I don't go around, making promises to people. How would you, how would you respond to that?
Right. So I'll respond to it on a couple of levels. The first is that part of what we are doing on Yom Kippur is connecting as a people with our people's past, right?
Okay.
You see that in the Torah reading, the idea of the goat, send away, all those things, which seem very strange to us, the service of the high priest. I'm going to come back and talk about it. So part of it is that. Part of, and though we may or may not do the same things they did, right? We are connected to them. I think people do, however, make resolutions that they don't keep. I don't know about you. I can't tell you how many times I've decided to do X, Y, or Z, either on Rosh Hashanah or on New Year's Day. And, sometimes it doesn't happen. Saying it doesn't really takes me off the hook. Sometimes I just don't keep that promise, that wish. And yes, that's much weaker than a vow. But at least for me, there's some relationship. The other thing is that everything on the holiday, pretty much, and we'll see this when we come to the penitential prayer, which we're going to look at briefly, it's all in the plural. This is not just about me, it's about the community of Israel.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Everything is in the plural. Any other questions about Kol Nidre? Yeah, Barry.
Yes, I mean, for me, I have a problem with nullifying the vows that we might make in the future. Yes. To me, it makes more sense for Yom Kippur about it.
Yes,
seeking forgiveness for mistakes and trying to do better in the coming year.
Yes, the original text was the past. I think I agree that the vows in the future is somewhat problematic, right? Because then, why would you make them? Who are you misleading? I do think that there is a kind of acknowledgement here that we will do our best, but we might well fail. I think it's about that, but feel free, Barry, to use the past tense. I don't know what's in the machzor that you have.
In a historical context, it does make sense for the crypto Jews.
Yes, it does.
Versos.
Yes, true, but this was much older.
Right. So you explain that, yes.
Okay, let me move on then to more of the liturgy. I'm going to share one more time. I'm going to bring my screen down. So the confessional, which takes place many times over the holiday, all right? Our God and of our ancestors, may our prayers come before you and you not ignore our pleas. And then we get this, we are neither so arrogant nor so stubborn as to declare that we are righteous and we have not sinned, right? Right. And in the Hebrew, right, we are not tzaddikim, we're not perfect righteous people. To say we lo chatanu, we have not sinned, but we have sinned. And then we get, and this is the shorter one, as you know, there's a longer enumeration, al chatanu, with this or with that, by the sin I have committed before you by doing this or that. And you'll notice that it begins with, each statement begins with a letter of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. And again, as I just said, it's all in the plural. If I haven't done it, then another Jew has done it. And we are all Jews, one people, one unity, and we are responsible for each other. If you look at it, you also see how much of it, in the Hebrew, it's a little clearer. But look, we have spoken slander. We have counseled evil. We have spoken falsehood. We have scoffed. We have blasphemed. Again, we have been stiff-necked. A lot of it is about speech. The things we say, the things that we fail to say. I don't know about you, as I go through this list, there are things I'll say, well, I certainly have not done some of these things. But if I think hard about it, I certainly have done others. And part of this, I think, is meant to stimulate our thinking, to search ourselves as we think back over the year and ask, when have I scoffed or revolted or committed iniquity? In fairness, I have to say, these words, the author of this, and it's a poem of sorts, had to find words that fit every letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Some of them are easy and some of them are hard. Gazalnu, right, which is robbery or theft. Well, that's easy with a given. Here we get to, I need something for Dalit, and so I get Barnu, which just means we have spoken, and then the word Dofi is added, and so on. So it's worth noting that there's a real constraint on the author of this. And then it goes on with a kind of wrap up. We have turned away from your mitzvot and your laws. We are poor for our disobedience. You are just. And this is one of the things that we emphasize again and again in the holidays. God is just, and we have sinned. So on the one hand, we're emphasizing God's justice, but in fact, everything we do is a plea for God's mercy. We know you are just, God, but we want to remind you that you are just. And we are acknowledging what we have done. And we're asking you, in a sense, to set aside that justice and to be merciful to us. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about the Yizkor service. The Yizkor service begins with a series of biblical verses, and I just want to look at them for a minute. Adonai ma'adam v'tedaehu. What are human beings that you have regard for us? Mortals that you take account of us. In other words, we are really nothing compared to God. And here you get this statement, Adam lehevel dama. A human being is like Hevel. Hevel is just a mere breath. Yamav kitzel oved. His days are like a fleeting shadow, right? This language will come back and be expanded upon in the unetaneh tokef, and we'll see that soon when we talk about it. But here it's taken actually from the Bible, from the book of Psalms. Teach us to number our days that we may attain heart of wisdom, right? This reflective of, again, biblical verse, but reflective of the theme of the holidays. We don't know how much time we have. We don't want to waste it. So teach us to make it meaningful, that we will have a leiv chacham, a wise heart. And then we get God is the one who redeems the nefesh. Here it's translated lives of God's servants, and those who trust in God shall not feel forsaken. And this sense that we shouldn't feel forsaken, I think, is really, in this context, about the loss of our loved ones. And then we have another biblical verse. I've set God before me always. God is my right hand. I will not fail. Therefore, my heart rejoices. My whole being exalts. My body. And now we move from that to a series of normal things. There is a tradition of visiting cemeteries before the high holidays. There is a sense of awareness of our family who was there with us, passed on these holidays and is no longer there. There's also a sense of reminding us of our own mortality. But Yizkor is more than that. It is a prayer for the soul of the beloved who is no longer here on earth. Shahalach li'olamo, who is God, literally, who has gone to his world. Here it's being translated as eternal rest. So the idea here is that our loved ones are no longer in this world, but they are in a different world. Judaism believes that death is not the end, though it is very unclear as to what comes next. And different periods of Jewish history have envisioned the afterlife in different ways. What is consistent among them is this sense of the afterlife. And now we ask God, Ana tehei nafsho tzrura b'tzrura chaim. May his, this is for a son, and so it's in the masculine, may his soul be bound up in the bonds of life. Very unclear what this means exactly, except I think it's a kind of plea that our lives and their lives should be bound up together, that they should not be forgotten among the living. Utehei menuchato kavod, and may his rest, his place of rest, be one of honor. Kavod is honor. And then Shevesh Machot et Panecha. It's a very odd statement. It's really, I don't even know how to translate it, but it has to do with sort of God should enjoy your presence. God should enjoy the divine presence, or be favored by the divine presence, be at your right hand. None of this gets translated here. And then what isn't also there is, may the deeds I perform and the prayers I offer help his soul to be bound up in the bond of life as a source of enduring blessing. The prayer itself in Hebrew is much more mystical, but it is a plea for the well-being of the deceased wherever they are. And it's a plea that they should be close to God, at God's right hand, as it were, enjoying God's presence. So let me stop sharing for a moment. And we've looked at now both the vidui, the confessional prayer, and also Yizkor. Any questions or comments?
Oh, I have one.
Let's all raise this hand.
Maybe somebody else wants to talk. I don't want to monopolize it.
Walter Saul.
Yeah, looking at the Art Scrolls Siddur,
Sure.
okay, their Yizkor,
yes,
their Yizkor prayer is much clearer. Okay, it says Bitzor Achayin Im Nishmot Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Bracha v'Leah Im Sha'ar Tzadikim Etzikon Yod Shebegan Eden Menorah Main. Much clearer, much more to the point, I think.
Yeah.
Instead of Savash Shemachot, whatever that means.
Yes. So yes, I think it is clearer. Outside of Art Scroll, I've never seen that version. I'm sure it's a traditional version. I'm glad you raised it. I can't think of having seen it. I don't even think it's in the going back through the conservative Machzorim, even in the Silverman Machzor, I don't think it's there. But yes, I think it is clearer. I think, and I actually think it's quite beautiful. Tying, not only the idea of being with God's presence, but together with our ancestors. And that idea that after death, we are together with our ancestors is very strongly there in the Bible. We see it, each time one of the patriarchs dies, they're gathered to their people, right? This idea that we're returning. And of course, you hear modern accounts of people who near death, who see their family waiting for them. But yeah, thank you for that. Besides Walter, anyone else before we go to him? Yes, Barry. And then Walter, you're next.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Barry.
Going back to the list of sins, just
Yeah.
an observation. Most, if not all, of those sins are done against a fellow man,
Yes.
rather than against God, and so it's somewhat contrary to the notion that we ask forgiveness from God of sins against God.
Yeah, it's really a good point. And we don't have, I mean, blasphemy is in there, right? But, we don't have, I violated Shabbat, right? I ate non-kosher food. We don't have, although in the longer, more expanded version, the sin that I have committed before you, we do through eating and drinking, right? So you do get some of that, but your point is well taken. What's problematic is that we don't get forgiven for sins against our fellow human beings unless they are willing to grant us forgiveness. We have to go and ask for it. In fact, the tradition says we need to ask for it 3 times. And if they refuse the 3rd time, then we can consider ourselves forgiven by God. So, and we of course have to do it sincerely. I'm always put off by people who come and routinely they'll go to everyone they know and they'll say, if I've done anything in the past to offend you during this year, please forgive me. It's so pro forma, right? So, I mean, as opposed to saying, the holidays are here. I want to make sure that our relationship is a good one. Please tell me if there's anything I've done that disturbed you. Pause. Wait. That is what I think it's supposed to be. Not sort of like, I've even heard in some Jewish communities, are you mochel me? Mechila is forgiveness, right? Are you mochel me? Yes, mochel. And they move on. Better than nothing, certainly, but very pro forma. So yeah, it is striking. And you're right that in general, it's very hard though to tease out what's a sin before a human being that's not a sin before God. Because God, Jewish law not only requires us to observe Shabbat, it also talks about how we have to, how God wants us to treat our fellow human beings. Walter.
Okay, Rabbi, this session has raised more questions than answers, but let me start off with my top question. The Shoah is mentioned, and in Elie Wiesel's book, Night, he talks about the Jews in the concentration camp, that when Yom Kippur came, there were some Jews who believed it was a test, that God was testing to their faith, and there were other Jews who rejected God and felt that God had deserted the Jewish people. So it seems to me, to use the word of today's session, problematic. Seems to me questionable of whether God is really, listening or helping us. Here we are, we're fasting, we're weak, we're asking him to forgive us, but where is he? Where is he doing what he should be doing to help us, forgive ourselves? It seems this is a one-sided relationship, and we grasp at the Exodus, we grasp at the positive things in our history, but the history of the Jewish people is one of, tragedy. There are just too many darn tragedies, too many expulsions, too many pogroms, too many massacres.
So I take your point. I will say that the Jewish tradition certainly acknowledges that. I actually spoke about this in the synagogue here this Shabbat. And I don't want to prolong this because I do want to get through a few other things. But very famous midrash about Moses and Rabbi Akiva. Moses is up on top of Mount Sinai. God is fashioning each letter very carefully. Moses says effectively, "Nu, give me the Torah. Back to the people. I promised I would come back." And God says, "Well, I have to do this because there will be a person who will come after many generations named Akiva, and he will learn from each of these letters a whole host of things." And Moses is like, "Wow, let me see him." And God says, "Turn around." And Moses finds himself now in the last row of Rabbi Akiva's yeshiva. And he's sitting there and he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Beyond Moses. And Moses is very upset until he hears Akiva. One of the students asks Akiva, "How do we know this?" And Akiva says, "Oh, this is a tradition that comes to us through Moses on Mount Sinai." Moses feels much better. And then he says to God, "Wow, I've seen his Torah. Let me see his reward." And Moses turns around and Rabbi Akiva is being martyred by the Roman soldiers, just tortured to death. And Moses says, "This is his Torah. This is his reward." And God says, "Silence. This is my will." So it's not that this tradition is unmindful of these problems. There is an expression was in last week's Torah about Hester Panim, that God shuts off or closes off God's face, and these things happen. I think that you can hold two things at the same time. You can hold that, and you can also hold, as many people do, the experience of God working in their lives. So I don't think it's possible to answer these questions. And you could say, yeah, it's all nourishment. You can say that. But I think for many of us, this is a deeply meaningful tradition, af al pi chen, despite all that. I'm going to go on just because we don't have much time, and I really do want to get back to where we were. So let me share again. Okay, so I'll go through this very quickly. This is about really a different level of the of what's going on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, in part, is a reenactment of the service that was done by the high priest, as is ordained in the Torah, in the temple. And it involves getting dressed in various clothing and taking two goats and bringing them to the entrance to the tent and taking lots, and one is for Azazel and the other is for God, and then sending off the one after various sacrifices, sending off the one to Azazel, carrying the sins of the whole people into the wilderness. This was an idea that really not only are the sins forgiven, but there's this almost visual, physical sense. And sin is viewed in the Bible as something extremely tangible. It is the sanctuary is cleansed of the sins of Israel. They is sort of stick to the altar, and they have to be cleansed, and they're cleansed through blood. As the sacrifices are made, and the blood is sprinkled on the altar. Very alien to the way we think today. In Yom Kippur, then, in the Musaf, we get not what we have in the Torah, but what we have in the Talmud, which is a listing of, imagine what the high priest actually did and said. Right? And so the high priest would say, "I have sinned, committed iniquity, transgressed before you, I and my household, and I beseech you, I and my household," and quoting the words of the Torah. And then when the people who were standing there, the priest, they were standing in the court, they heard the glorious, awesome, ineffable name pronounced by the high priest in holiness and purity, they would bow and kneel and prostrate themselves, saying, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. This takes place in the synagogue as we read this, and we'll do it several times. When it comes to this point, the clergy of the congregation, and in some cases, the congregants as well, or some of them, will actually fall prostrate. Not only bend the knee as we do in Aleinu, but actually kneel down and prostrate themselves on the floor in a reenactment of what the people did according to the Talmud in the time that the temple stood. There is a part of it, I didn't copy all of it, where in this text it talks about how the high priest would sprinkle the blood, and he would count achat v'achat, shtayim, shtayim, and of course that is often repeat during the service itself. I'm going to come to unetaneh tokef in a second, and then after unetaneh tokef, we will want to say a word about ne'ilah. But before I do, one more chance to say something. Anything at all about what we do and what they did, because it really is central to what we're doing. Okay, having heard none, let me go to unetaneh tokef. I didn't get to talk about it when we talked about Rosh Hashanah. It is a prayer that really was originally linked to Rosh Hashanah. There's a reference to something like it in the Talmud. There is a legend about unetaneh tokef that it was written actually by a man named Amram from Minsk, who was asked to convert to Christianity at the cost of his life, and he said he would think about it for 3 days. After 3 days, he told them that he would not do it. They tortured him, and with his dying breath, he returns to the synagogue and he offers this prayer. It's a beautiful legend, but it's undoubtedly not true. It's older than that, at least in some form. And I want to look at the text itself, starting with, here we are. We proclaim the great sanctity of this day of awe and trembling. We sense your dominion. We envision you on the throne of judgment, judging us in truth, but with compassion. You judge and admonish, discerning our motives, witnessing our actions. You record, seal, count, and measure. You remember even what we have forgotten. And here, we open the book of remembrance. The record speaks for itself, and each of us has signed it with our deeds. So God knows everything, even the things we're not aware of. The imagery here is that they are written in a book. It's simply an image. After all, God doesn't need a book to remind God of things that we have thought or done. But the idea is that we did them. We now acknowledge them. And now we get this beautiful imagery of court where the shofar is sounded and a still small voice is heard. Reference that still small voice to something that Elijah heard in the whirlwind. The angels are dismayed, right? Even though they are considered perfect beings, they cry out, Hine Yom Hadin, it's the day of judgment. And even they are judged, and even they are not, even they are completely innocent. And so there's this idea that no matter how good we are, we have flaws. Even people we think of as perfect have flaws. All of the people on earth pass before you one by one. Kivnei marom, a flock of sheep, like a flock of sheep, although it seems there's been a lot of research about what B'nai Marom means. And some people think it's referring to soldiers who are passing before their commander. There's another explanation which I like a lot, which is that Marom is a narrow pass, the top of a mountain, with danger on either side. At any rate, here we do pick up on the idea of the sheep, as a shepherd counts his sheep, you review a living being, measuring the years, decreeing the destiny. So then we get this idea. Rosh Hashanah is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed, and who shall live and who shall die, who in the fullness of years, who shall perish, and how we will die, famine or sword or wild beast, thirst, earthquake, who by plague, who by strangling and stoning. Strangling and stoning are two of the ancient capital punishments. Who will rest, who will wander, who will be serene and who will be disturbed, who will be at ease and be afflicted. So one can read this as saying God has reviewed all of our deeds and decreed, as a result of what we have done, God has decreed what will happen to us. But if we do tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and deeds of kindness, we can be forgiven. I don't personally read it that way. I read it in the following way, which is to disconnect the paragraph Barosh Hashanah Yekatevun from what came before. That is to say that God decides the fate of every creature. And notice this is not just Jews, this is the whole world. And we are mortal, and we will all die, and we will die in various ways. And that is decreed. The question is, how will we experience the trials and tribulations that come before us? Whether we are at rest or wander, whether we are serene and disturbed, all of that. And then it says, repentance, prayer, and deeds of kindness, ma'avirin et roa hagezera. Ma'avir is to pass over, pass away. And it doesn't say ma'avirin et hagezera. It doesn't cancel the decree. It is roa here it says severity of the decree. Roa means kind of the badness of the decree. And what I think about this is that these are strategies. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah are ways of dealing with the things that it has in store for us. It can mitigate some of the pain of what will happen. It doesn't cancel what will happen, but it can give us a perspective on our lives. It gives us a way of responding, calling upon God for help in difficult hours, figuring out how to live our lives the best way we can, being charitable, giving to other people, treating other people with kindness. All of these things will not change our faith. It will help our lives, whatever amount of life we have, to be more meaningful. And the imminence of our death, whether it is near or far, we will feel that we have lived good and meaningful lives. Now it goes on to say, you don't want us to die. You want us to repent and to live. And then there's this beautiful line. Our origin is dust and our end is dust. At the hazard of our lives, we earn our bread. And now, similar to the psalm, but here we get just this amazing imagery. We are fragile vessels like grass that withers, the flower that fades, the passing shadow, the cloud that vanishes, the wind that blows, the dust that floats, the dream that flies away. Our lives are so insignificant, and yet they are so meaningful. And because of their insignificance, because they are so fleeting, then every moment really is worth savoring and cherishing. And we're asking God, in a sense, to give us another year of life. The rabbi in my synagogue said something which I thought was nice about unetaneh tokef. He said, basically, the message is we're grateful for last year and we want to be gifted another one. And I think in the end, that's more or less what it's about. I want to read something, and then I'll open it up for questions for those who can stay. One of the unique things about Yom Kippur is Ne'ilah. It's the last service. There's no Ne'ilah for any other holiday that I'm aware of. This is a meditation before Ne'ilah, written by Milton Steinberg, great American rabbi, years and years ago. And I always turn to it before Ne'ilah because it seems to me to capture the essence of that moment. And so let me read it. As we sit here in meditation and prayer, the last lingering grains of sand filter through the hourglass of this holy day. The dusk draws us ever closer. The relentless hand of time hangs poised to mark the end of Yom Kippur. In the entire Jewish year, there is no moment more solemn than this one. All through the day, the flood of prayer has ebbed and flowed. Now, as the sun sinks low, as the shadows of night draw near, we find a new pitch of intensity. And now here's a quote from the Ne'ilah service. Open for us the gate at the hour of the closing of the gates. The word Ne'ilah, which the name of the service about to begin, is the locking of a gate. In ancient days, as long as the sun shone, the gates of the temple were kept open. All who wanted to could enter. At nightfall, the gates were locked. From then on, no one can enter or leave. Later, the word Ne'ilah was applied to the last service. In this day, the Jews saw a spiritual gate, an entranceway to a new relationship with God, an opportunity to change and begin again. In our lives, many gates open before us and close behind us. Each year has been such a gate. As the years have come and gone, gates have opened and shut. No power or prayer can reopen a gate that has swung shut. It is sealed forever. But a new gate has opened before us. It beckons to us with wondrous gifts. It offers us minutes, hours, days. How will we use these gifts? At this Ne'ilah hour, let us resolve to enter the gates of truth, justice, kindness, compassion, love, and forgiveness, to seek those that abide forever. Let us use well the opportunities that now beckon before the gate swings shut. To me, that's beyond all the liturgy we had over thousands of years. That's one of the most beautiful. Okay. Unetaneh tokef, Ne'ilah, anything else? I welcome your questions.
Okay, I'll wait for other people.
Okay, Francesca.
That is so beautiful. Is there any way you can send that to us in a way that we can print it? I tried printing it on my computer, and I wasn't able to.
Yes, I will send it out as an email attachment.
Oh, thank you so much. Absolutely beautiful reading.
I'll do it when I send out the notice about the recording. So if you look
Okay.
at it,
Whenever that would be.
Sure.
A lot of us are getting busy ready for the next holiday that's almost upon us. So we understand if it needs to be afterwards.
Other comments, questions? Unetaneh, yes, Saul. Then
Yeah, I remember many, many years ago in Philadelphia and of course in New York, if you would listen to the Yiddish program on a Sunday or the other program in New York or during the week, on the weekend before, on the Sunday before Yom Kippur, they would always play a lot of different versions of Kol Nidre. It was always beautiful.
Yeah, it is remarkable. I will tell you a joke though. There's this guy who comes to the rabbi and he says, the service is so boring. All the melodies they're always the same. And the rabbi says, what are you talking about? At Don Olam, we have 5 different melodies to it. Don. He says, no, he says, when I go to shul, it's always Kol Nidre. It's just one time a year in shul. So he's at any rate, the melody is beautiful. There is actually a piece. I forgot who wrote it. It's a cello piece based around the music of Kol Nidre. You could Google it. You'll find it. Yeah, it's extraordinary, really extraordinary. And the various interpretations by various Hazanim also really extraordinary. Sandy.
So, getting back to unetaneh tokef, I think, tell me if this is true or not, that people have I would say, misconception that
Wait, go back.
if they die.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I think I say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people have the misconception that in the coming year, if they die, that means they did something bad previous year.
Yeah,
And your rabbi reinforced that wrong conception. Because everyone's going to die. So do we say, oh, the person died this year, they did something bad the year before?
No,
that's not to be understood. And also, even worse than that, if somebody related to them or someone they know dies this year, it's their fault that happened. In other words, it's not that year. The way I understand it is when someone dies, then God looks at them. But it's not, I don't think there's a direct relationship. And your rabbi reinforced, I think, the bad thing.
So
he scared people and he put fear in people's hearts.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong.
I understand what you're saying. I just think that's a misreading of this. And I don't know any rabbis today who would ever say, oh, that person died because they did something wrong. In fact, we have an entire book of the Bible which is about that, right? You have the book of Job. And Job, it's clear Job is innocent. It's clear Job didn't do anything wrong. Job's various friends come to him and they say, Job, you must have, maybe you weren't aware of it. You must have done something wrong. Maybe it wasn't so big, but, really. And the book of Job is really clear. No, it's not true. I think the idea of unetaneh tokef is, yeah, we're going to die. We need to look at how we have lived our lives and resolve that we not waste them, looking back over the past. But I don't think this, I don't know, any rabbis would read this prayer that way and decree. I go back to the story I told you about Moses and Akiva. Did Akiva do something wrong that he was martyred by the Romans? There is a sense, though, here of time is slipping away, right? And if you don't acknowledge what you're doing and what you've done, you don't know what the next year will bring you. I don't want to get into a back and forth about this. That is how I read it. Feel free not to say it if you really don't like it. I promised Walter, and then we'll come to Francesca. Go ahead.
Rabbi, thank you for remembering me. Okay, real quick, where did the idea of prayer tzedakah and tefillah come in? In other words, did some rabbi just make it up and say, all right, if you do these three things, the severity of the punishment will be less? Or was there some, theological basis for this, that really
I
is
think,
meaningful?
yes, I understand. I think, yes, there is a theological basis. I think for the rabbis, right, these are essential human responses to life, right? Prayer is really about, praising God, asking God for things, essentially having a relationship with God, right? And tshuva is really about trying to be the best person you can, regretting what you've done wrong, resolving to use the time you have well, in a way that brings credit to your creator, makes your life mean something. And tzedakah is all about acts of kindness and justice. So I think these are fundamental and primary religious values. And if we had to condense everything into three, I don't know, those would necessarily be the three, but they're pretty central.
Thank you.
Francesca, you had a
Yes, Uncle, I just decided to have a conversation with Uncle Google. So he told me that Max Bruch composed a cello version with orchestra and of Kol Nidre, that is. And there are a number of people. There's someone, Stephen Isserlis, recorded this with someone playing piano and harp,
yeah.
which I thought would be very cool. Darren Bornboim also has a recording of the piece, and Misha Maysky was a recording with the Frankfurt Radio Symphony. So there's all kinds of possibilities if people want to hear it. I just thought that would be interesting.
So in the synagogue where I was, at the Hewlett East Rockaway Jewish Center, we had actually the two sons of a woman who was for a while president were both very serious cellists. And we're going to, the finest music schools. And anyway, they would perform it right before Kol
How
Nidre.
wonderful.
Because after all, not yet Yantiv. And it really set exactly the right mood. They would do it, then we would do Mincha, and then we would go into Kol Nidre. So it was really set exactly the right mood for the service.
Sounds it.
Other comments, questions? All right. Well, Gemar Chatima Tova. You should have a meaningful. People always say an easy fast. It shouldn't be too arduous, but if you don't feel it at all, it's not a good thing.
Rabbi.
Do a meaningful fast and a Chag Sameach. I'll be sending out a note. My regular classes will begin after Simchat Torah, and I'll be sending out a schedule about them and also a list of the things. As I mentioned last year, I'm not going to do a book of the Bible. I'm going to focus on specific biblical personalities from throughout the Bible, and I'll send you a list of those along with a tentative schedule for when I'll be teaching. And I look forward. I hope you'll all join me as we continue this adventure once the holidays are over. So
Will the class be at 11 or 11:30?
11 o'clock.
Going back to 11 o'clock this year? Okay, just so I know.
Consensus of people in terms of what they preferred. 11 o'clock Tuesday mornings.
All right,
Okay,
sounds good. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Easy fast.